Now we're going into the hints and tips portion of the slideshow. Arbor Izing sometimes may solve a problem for you. Arbor Izing is kind of a fancy word for taking all the lower limbs off of a mature shrub and turning it into a cute little tree. Arbor means tree. Here's a shrub that's dressed to the ground, and there's nothing wrong with that. It serves a function. It's an Arbutus unido, and it's screening a very ugly parking lot. And it's kind of a cool plant, and you can just leave it alone and enjoy it as it is. But the fellow who had this Arbutus, this strawberry bush, was blocked the view to the street when he was backing out of his driveway, and so he would get into accidents. So he took off a bunch of the lower limbs and turned it into a cute little tree. Here again, you want at least half of the shrub to be covered in foliage. We want a tree, we don't want a parachute. And we don't want a lollipop. The one on the left is a lollipop, and the trunk is too skinny and too straight. So before you arborize a shrub, you want to take a peek inside and ask yourself, is that trunk going to be beautiful to look at when I take off these lower limbs? And you may want to thin out a little bit on top too, so it doesn't look top heavy. There's only some shrubs that allow you to do this without getting water sprouts. How will you know? Well, you'll go to the Plant Amnesty Pruning Guide, which has the list of shrubs and trees, and in it should be listed the ones that water sprout easily, therefore thin lightly, and avoid arborizing. There's a whole series of shrubs and trees that you just look at them cross-eyed, they will explode into water sprouts, and you will spend the rest of your life trying to get rid of them. These are the ones that we thin lightly, and I have our local ones memorized. They would be dogwoods, magnolias, crabapples, cherries. What else? Witch hazels, things that remind you of witch hazels, double file viburnums, and I think I put cotoneaster in this group. Then there are the ones that take heavy thinning or arborizing, and these are the ones that don't have the capacity to water sprout back. That would be most of your conifers, and I put camellias and pieris and some others in this group. And you can thin a lot more on these. Your main criteria is going to be, does it look good? And I got to tell you, there was a consultation I went to where I went around the corner with this lady and I saw this horribly over-thinned camellia with just a few leaves on the outside, and she said her husband went to a pruning class and the teacher said, thin it so that a bird can fly through, and she told him he meant a sparrow, not a goose. So aesthetics is a concern. The pruning budget varies from plant to plant. Too bad it's not posted. Too bad they can't talk back and say, wait a minute, I think that's enough. You need to come back next year. And the pruning budget is made up of 3 elements: the size of the cut, the total amount of foliage removed, and the kind of a cut. And I struggle for an analogy. My weight is made up of 3 things: what I eat, how much I eat, and how much I exercise. So the pruning budget on your plant is made up of the size of the cut. Big cut spends more of the budget than a little cut. The kind of a cut, a selective heading or reduction cut, spends more of the budget than a thinning cut, and the total amount of foliage that you've taken off your plant. And sometimes it's good to leave that on the ground so you know how much you've taken off. And you can spend that budget any number of ways. There isn't like the right cut. Say for example, on a lilac, you might want to cut a couple of canes to the ground, or you might want to do a couple of reduction cuts and 10 thinning cuts. or maybe you want to do 50 thinning cuts and nothing else. You can spend that budget any way you want, you just cannot exceed it. But I will give you a little bit of advice, which is you can have a tall, thin, open, delicate thing, or you can have a short, thick, broad thing. You cannot have a short, open, delicate thing. Once you shorten something, it thickens up and broadens. The 3 great secrets to pruning. Dead wood, remove lower limbs, and get the right plant in the right place, which means you need to allow for its adult size. I know that what happens is people ignore their plant tags. They read their plant tags and they think that that's the size the plant is ultimately going to be, and it's not. That's just how big it's going to be in 5 to 10 years. And they kind of downsize it a little bit in their mind, and they think, well, I really want a shrub faster, and therefore I'm going to get something that's bigger, and if it gets too big, I'll just prune it to keep it small. And as I told you, you really can't. So please pay attention to your plant tag. Most of pruning is not to keep the plant small, it's to make your landscape look better. And a lot of times it's really to referee between plants. When they're crowded into each other, making a giant wall of oppressive green, you might want to separate them by working on 2 plants at once. And you do that by lifting, taking off some of the lower limbs, taking some out of each shrub that's crowded into the other. And then I like to put that little notch in between the shrub and the house, or between the 2 shrubs. We call it lift and separate. Lift and separate. Back to hints and tips. If you have something that reminds you of a rug, in this case, it is a juniper, and it's headed out over the walkway, and I'm having a hard time getting by. You don't want to cut it off even with the walkway, because if you get into those dead brown branches, they won't green back up. That's the problem with most conifers, is if you cut into that barren wood, it doesn't green back up. So instead, the trick is to lift up the top and cut off the lowest branches and drop the top back down, because it's those lowest branches that spread out too far on the walkway. And this also works with other shrubs that remind you of a rug. Things like cistus, heathers, a lot of the ground covers, when they come flowing out over your walkway, instead of cutting it off even, you undercut it, and then it looks more natural. Whoops! This is what happens when you cut into a conifer. You get the dead zone. And this will never green back up. This is a candidate for a truck and a chain. This is what it looks like when you're doing it. More hints and tips. The mature size is just the size that your plant is going to be in 5 to 10 years, and it will rather quickly get there. Well, actually, the first 2 years it won't seem to grow at all. The 5 stages of plant growth are too small, just right, too big, way too big, and humongous. And they all go through these phases. And this is under genetic control. When your plant gets too big, just know it was always going to do this. And it probably couldn't have been stopped with pruning. The mature size is just how big it's going to get to be in 5 to 10 years. Then it starts to slow down, and it finally maxes out roughly twice what's ever on the plant tag or in your plant dictionary. Bad news, I know, for a lot of you. The things in the cane grower category and the mounding habit category, you can pretty easily keep in that mature size with pruning. The things in the tree-like category are best let to get as big as they want to be, lest you mess them up with pruning. And by messing them up, I mean make them look wonky or get water sprouts. I assert that you will be unable to keep your shrub smaller than its mature size. I know because I've tried on everything. If it could be done, I would tell you how to do it. And I have actually told you how to try without messing up too bad. So let's do a little review perhaps. There are 3 kinds of cuts. The non-selective heading cut, also known as heading. The selective heading cut, also known as a reduction cut. And the thinning cut, which is the best for trees. It's called also called a removal cut. And we talked about 3 types of plant habits. We've got your basic mounding habit shrub, your cane growing shrub, and your trees and your tree likes. And we talked about 3 kinds of pruning. You got your grab and snip, that's to shorten and tidy up plants. Works best on the mounding habit shrubs, but sometimes you can do it on other things. Radical renovation, that's when you cut a plant to the ground or a very low framework and let it regrow. You sort of start it over. That's best on cane growers, but it does work on some of the other ones. And thinning out or limbing up, that's when you take off lower limbs or a lot of thinning cuts to make something open and airy. But there are other ways to make your landscape look good.